The Secrets of Star Wars is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to The Secrets of Star Wars, episode 52.
Hello there.
It's a power that Jedi have that lets them control people and make things float.
Impressive. Every word in that sentence was wrong.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
It's against my programming to impersonate a deity.
That's not how the Force works.
Force is with me, and I am with the Force, and I fear nothing.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
Hey everybody, I'm Father Andrew Kinstetter, aka Father Fett, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Wars, where we talk about everything connected to that galaxy far, far away, including the deeper themes and meanings. And today we're discussing Star Wars Rebels Season 4, Episode 13, A World Between Worlds. I think this might be my favorite episode of the entire show. So joining me today on the panel are, first up, we have Angela Cialana.
Hello, everyone.
Howdy, howdy. And second up this evening is Thomas Sanjurjo.
How's it going?
It's going pretty well, more or less. So, yeah. This is just I thought this was a really fun episode. So, of course, I'm going to throw it back to you guys. And what were your impressions of this episode?
Well, I think this was an episode where Star Wars fans got exactly what we wanted, kind of. Yep. I mean, maybe most of us. So I know some people at first were like freaked out because there was time travel in Star Wars. But I think, we got all the interconnection between the different storylines and even different media. And so that was, to me, one of the most exciting things about this episode, besides the fact that, where it takes place and what the implications of that are. And then also getting to know what happened in Twilight of the Apprentice. So getting to know what happened to Ahsoka and Vader. And that was really, really neat. So, and then also getting 2D animation for the first time.
Yeah.
Was cool too. So just a whole lot of really cool firsts in this episode.
Yeah, for sure. Thomas?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting take on the will of the Force too. And I've been exploring that concept a lot more lately of what it means for the Force to will something, because they talk a lot about the will of the Force and looking into the future. That's one of Yoda's big shticks is looking into the future and not getting caught up in the emotion of it. But in this case, we're actually physically moving through the past using the Force and changing something that has happened. And it's such an interesting concept to think of the power that the Force has to do that, first off, and then also whether or not it's okay, whether or not that's a thing that we should be playing with, using the Force, because is that against the will of the Force? But the Force brought you there. There's a lot of questions that kind of come up throughout this whole thing.
I would just agree with both of you. I am a huge fan of time travel. That is my favorite science fiction storytelling device. So this, I think that's probably why this is my favorite episode ever. I love that aspect, and I love the moral implications of, if you could go back in time, should you change something? And that's exactly kind of what they do and don't do in this episode. So to kind of play out those things are really fun for me. And I will say that time travel, I don't think is at all foreign to the nature of Star Wars. I think I've kind of said before that I see Star Wars as kind of the science fantasy world versus science fiction, which would be more the Star Trek kind of. Even in Star Trek, there's time travel though too. So I mean, it's kind of built into to science fiction, But I also want to point out that time travel was also in the Legends universe before Disney. If you got into the novels at all, some of the post Return of the Jedi novels dealt with something they called flow walking, which was just that whole notion of being able. Basically, they compared the Force and time to a river, and you could kind of walk back up the river, and you could kind of like, you know, move some stones, but you could never really change the trajectory of the river, which was the will of the Force, basically. And if you managed to do that, it had cosmic, galactic wide implications. Read Fate of the Jedi if you want to read about that, which is really fun. But that's all Legends universe.
Yeah. So actually, since you bring that up, do you think that's where they got the inspiration for, like, when Ezra's walking along those paths, that there's like ripples, like that whole river concept? Do you think that's where they got it?
I want to say yes. I tend to think not, though. I did watch the Rebels Recon.
Yeah.
And what they had mentioned in there, they were mentioning more that they wanted to portray kind of the journeying and the walking. And so that was a visible thing of him walking. However, it does look like ripples in a water pathway. So
yeah.
So
they
yes.
don't really, like, on those Rebels Recon episodes, they don't really they don't talk about legends very much.
Yep.
I mean, that's probably
they try to avoid
company
them.
policy. I don't know, but
well, and considering this one is Dave Filoni, you know, Dave Filoni is one of the directors for this one. I think there's probably he's really, really, really well versed in Star Wars stuff. So I would not doubt that being a direct inspiration. But again, like you said, they can't really, you know. They don't bring up the stuff that's not canon anymore.
And Pablo Hidalgo is he's so well versed in both canon and Legends. And I mean, Star Wars is doing a good job of trying to draw inspiration from Legends where they can. Thrawn being maybe the key example of that. So, yeah, I maybe it was a subtle nod to the flow walking concept, and not something you could directly, because it's definitely a different method of time travel than what it was in the Legends. But I thought it was a really interesting way to do time travel within the Star Wars universe. So yeah, yes. I really enjoyed this episode. And I also liked how Kanan's death is sort of the key of the whole episode. That's kind of the right at the middle, of course, when Ezra and Ahsoka are watching that happen, but it's also referenced at the beginning and at the end, and it's kind of the key of the whole thing. So I want to get into that when we get to that point into the walkthrough. Cool. So we'll jump into it. This episode takes place immediately after where the prior episode left off. So to kind of give a brief recap of that, the Ghost crew is on Lothal, and they have managed to successfully infiltrate where the Empire is at the Jedi Temple on Lothal. And Kanan has sacrificed himself to help the team get away from the Empire. So he is dead. And Ezra had gotten this Force vision from a Loth wolf named Doom, coincidentally and not coincidentally named after Caleb Doom, who is the previous name of Kanan Jarrus. So, and Ahsoka makes that reference later on in the episode as well. But Doom, this Loth wolf, gave Ezra this stone tablet with the key to getting into the Jedi Temple, and sent him on this mission to go rescue the Jedi Temple from the Empire. And so the previous episode, they managed to infiltrate the camp, and Ezra is able to open the portal and jumps through it. And so that's exactly where this episode picks up. We start off by seeing just kind of what it looks like in this, through the portal. We have this immense, kind of vast, starry-filled landscape. We hear the voices of Jedi past and present and future, which, Angela, is what you were referencing earlier, which is really kind of fun. We hear Yoda, we hear Obi-Wan, we hear Qui-Gon, we hear Ahsoka, we hear Kanan. I think later on we actually even hear Rey, and we hear Maz from the sequel trilogy as well.
Jarrett, Imwe, Jin, Urso, Kylo Ren, Anakin Skywalker. I wrote them all down.
Yeah. So it's a place, and I think
Poe Dameron.
Oh, geez, I missed him entirely. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this place where the Force and time and space all converge, and so we have all of those events, past and present and future, kind of for the viewing, and you can hear them happening. And so Ezra falls through this portal and he enters this world between worlds. And I liked how at that point they threw in the voice of Obi-Wan from episode 4, just explaining the nature of the Force to Luke is what Ezra hears as he is exploring this world for the first time. And then we jump back to Sabine, who has been captured, and she is brought before this Minister Hayden, who is kind of the leading expert on the Jedi Temple excavation and trying to get access into the temple and into the knowledge that is hidden there. And he tries to more or less, he's forcing her to cooperate with him and trying to figure out the secrets of the various art that they see depicted on the Jedi Temple walls. And he's kind of taunting her, and ultimately he informs her that the Emperor knows that Ezra has entered the temple and that he's going to find her. But I also wanted to point out that he also makes the point that he says that Kanan's death was meaningless. And I want to point that out now, because that happens at the beginning of this episode, because that's one of the themes that they play throughout the episode, is that at least he is trying to taunt Sabine into thinking that Kanan's death was meaningless, and of course it is absolutely not.
Yeah, I think that's, as you go through this scene, or as you go through this whole episode, you see what. One of the most beautiful understandings of the difference between the light side and the dark side of the Force, and so much of it is about anger and hate and emotions and all this kind of stuff. But really, what it comes down to is that to the dark side user, everything is meaningless other than what they want, and to the light side user, everything has an implicit meaning, and they're seeking to understand it. And that one difference, it gets played up so many times in this episode, where just the small choices that Ezra makes as he's in the world between worlds, it really does have such an impact, and it makes him kind of understand who he is as he grows into realizing that every single act is so important, and you just have to follow the will of the Force and finding what it is that you're supposed to do.
Yeah, so when Minister Hayden is talking, he's explaining this, junction that Ezra has found, that it's a pathway between time and space, and he uses the word control. He says, he who controls it controls the universe. And ultimately that goes to what you're saying, Thomas. It's like everything's about control. And right, like what the Force wielder wants for themselves, ultimately. So I thought that was very interesting, because control is really a major theme. Control and letting go is a major theme in this episode.
Exactly.
And that's
and realizing that you don't have to be. I think, and Ahsoka is such a great example of this too, where you don't have to be the linchpin of everything. And she's a secondary character, like so on a very meta cognitive level, right? She's not the linchpin to anything, but she's so intriguing because she's there for all of it, and her actions are significant. But at the same time, she's not a Skywalker. She's not in that main cast, but she still is really important.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that this sets up the central conflict that Ezra goes through as well. And it's that is he going to use the power of the world between worlds to save Kanan, or is he going to let go? It's that selfish or selfless kind of road. Which one are you going to take? And the dark side is going to say it's always a selfish way. That's you should do it for yourself. You should do it for power. You should do it for control. if you give yourself in a selfless way, what meaning is there in that? It's meaningless. Kanan's death was meaningless. He gave himself out in that way, and it's meaningless. And so it's that conflict that is what Ezra has to grapple with. And Ahsoka she is such an interesting character because she becomes almost the voice of conscience to Ezra in those moments. And she's not a Jedi, she's not a Sith, and yet she is very clearly on the right side of things, if I can say that.
Yeah.
Even Morai, the owl that is with her, is linked to the daughter in the Mortis arc, who is an embodiment of the light side of the Force. So, all of those things are very much at play here. So we learn that Ezra has stumbled into this temple that is it's a world between worlds. It's this it's a pathway between all of time and space. And whoever controls it controls the universe, and that's why the Emperor is seeking it. And so we hear more voices. Ezra hears Yoda and Obi-Wan, and he thinks that they can hear him, and he calls out to them, but they of course don't answer. And that's where we hear some of the other various people throughout the history of Star Wars as well. And then Ezra does encounter Morai at one of the portals, and he definitely notices that Morai is always around when Ahsoka is near, and he asks Morai for help, and all Morai does is hoots and kind of gestures toward the portal that she is beneath. And this is one of the pivotal moments of the episode that the portal kind of glows and Ezra can see through it, and we go back to season 2. Twilight of the Apprentice, which was unexplained for 2 years at this point.
Right.
And we finally see the confrontation between Vader and Ahsoka, and which was a really cool thing to see. And I put that Ahsoka definitely manages to hold her own against Vader. And it wasn't that long of a fight though, because the temple on Malachor was going to, I can't remember exactly what it was going to do. It was a weapon, so it was like powering up, and things were about to explode. And Ezra, of course, is just kind of watching this from a third person perspective almost, and doesn't know what to do. And out of instinct, reaches in and pulls Ahsoka through the portal to him as Vader kind of falls through the floor.
And I like how it's not even, he didn't even make a choice to do that. It was just, he felt like he was there watching it and just grabbed her. And then you start to think of the implications of what's going on there. Because this is a 2-year-old fight that he just interacted with. And you're like, whoa, oh my. Because I remember the moment I first saw this episode and watching that and going, oh my gosh, that, how I thought he was just watching. I didn't even know he could do something to it.
Yeah, this is very clearly you can influence the past, or you can change the past. That's where the power comes into play. So Ahsoka is dropped on the floor next to Ezra, and we go back to Minister Hayden, who's talking about art from the Jedi Temple, which I really find that interesting, and I was really glad that they pull all this in, especially with Thrawn, who is a character who's known to study the art of cultures in order to understand the culture and then understand their weakness and their strengths, and is able to, defeat them in battle and everything. So art has been very much a theme in Rebels with Thrawn, and so it's natural that it comes up here. But the art in this episode was phenomenal. I know you guys have kind of mentioned that too, but in particular, he's pointing out this one frame of art that's on the Jedi Temple wall, the exterior of the wall. It's the 3 figures, the father, the son, and the daughter. And so they Hayden and Sabine have this discussion on them. And these are 3 characters that, if you want to learn more about them, they're in the Mortis arc in the Clone Wars season 3. A really cool 3 episodes there that kind of set up these 3 cosmic force wielders who are neither Jedi nor Sith and sort of exist outside of time in this weird planet that you don't really know where it's at. I was trying to watch some of the Mortis arc earlier today, and it's they don't even know where in the galaxy they are when they're on that planet. So it's sort of this outside of time, outside of space place with these 3 cosmic force wielders, the father, the son, and the daughter. And the son is an embodiment of the dark side of the force, and the daughter is an embodiment of the light side of the force, and the father is the one who is keeping the balance between the two. And so these are 3 figures that have cropped up throughout the history of the Jedi, because Minister Hayden has found these art images in the Jedi archives on Coruscant. And so he's been studying them because they're showing up here on the Jedi Temple as well. And what was interesting is that when Ezra entered the temple, the paintings actually moved and changed. The daughter, her hand, or no, she kind of drops lower. She
turned away.
Yeah. And it was
her head moves, and the father's hand changes position.
Yeah. Yep. The father's hand actually points towards the gateway that the Loth Wolves go and create. So he's trying to figure out what that all means, and Sabine isn't really wanting to help him.
Yeah, which I think this is, out of all of the kind of digression we've gone on with all of the looking at Rebels and looking at Ahsoka and all of this was a really important moment to kind of tie back into the Mandalorian lore that we know and that we're learning and that's developing as we go through. And I've been struck by that. Like small little moments have been really significant throughout the stuff we did, but this one's one that's like it gives us an insight to kind of a secret Mandalorian perspective on the world, and that's that noticing the hand language, and that becomes more and more of an issue and becomes very significant to her. And so now we know that that's something that's also part of the Mandalorian religion, if we want to call it that, the culture that they bring with them.
I was going to say something not as deep and insightful. I was just going to say that I loved Sabine's quote here. I'm smarter than you. I just kind of want them to put that on a t-shirt, but I know they won't because it's so snarky.
It's also true, though. I mean, she said it as a taunt, but her and Ezra were definitely smarter than they were in figuring it out. I was just going to say that the hand language was something that was just, it was so brief, and it wasn't even, it didn't even play a role in the rest of the episode or anything. It was just Sabine is recognizing it, but and shares that she knows what it means, but doesn't. That's kind of it. That's and that's not actually what's necessary to understand the painting even. So that's a good catch. After that whole discussion, so Sabine is being snarky and isn't wanting to help, and so Hayden brings in the Death Troopers to coerce her into helping him. And then we jump back to Ezra and Ahsoka, which was a really touching reunion between the two of them. Ezra, of course, hasn't seen her in I guess 2 years. I mean, if every season is kind of a year in galaxy, and I'm not entirely sure if that's true more or less, but he obviously looks different. His hair is cut since season 2. Ahsoka notices that he's different. And Ezra can't even explain what happened and how Ahsoka ended up with him in the world between worlds. And so they're trying to just kind of get their bearings. And Morai is able to reunite then with Ahsoka, and Ahsoka asks about Kanan. And Ezra just says that she missed a lot in her time jump. We swap back to Hera and Zeb, who are in the process of sneaking down into the excavation pit to rescue Sabine and Ezra. And I just Zeb is awesome. Like all he wants to do is blow stuff up. And that's more or less exactly what they're going to do, going down there to cause a distraction, so that way they can break Sabine out and get Ezra out. And Chopper's also there, and he plays a role later on that's pretty important too. But for the moment, he's told to just kind of keep an eye out for Ezra. And then we go back to the world between worlds, and that's where you actually get the name of the place, if you will, because Ahsoka remarks that the place that they're in is ancient. She says it's like a world between worlds. So I don't know if that's the actual name of it, but that's the name of the episode, and that's kind of what we've been referring to it as.
I think Ahsoka gets to name it then. That's it. She got it.
The world between worlds. Yeah.
Done.
And this Ezra makes the comment that it's like when he met Doom, and that was the Loth Wolf in it was 2 episodes previous to this one, who sent him on this journey to save the Jedi Temple. And one of the things that Doom told Ezra in that episode that I thought was really interesting, kind of going back and then knowing this episode it happens, is Doom says, quote, "Restore past, redeem future." So telling Ezra more or less the game plan. Restore the past, and that can redeem the future. Now, I don't know if Ezra at all was thinking about that, but that was one of the things that the Loth Wolf told him, and so I can't help but apply it to what he actually did with Ahsoka. Restoring what happened to her in the past is a way that she is able to then redeem the future somehow.
And then also allowing Kanan to die and not do anything, I think in a way is kind of restoring the past. In other words, allowing it to remain what it is.
Yeah, if nothing else, just for Ezra himself, because since he doesn't actually ever change anything, he's at least healing his own memory of what happened, and is able to do more of that grief processing and let Kanan go in order to then move forward and redeem the future in what's coming. Ahsoka makes the suggestion that perhaps Kanan was actually speaking through the wolf, which I think is exactly what was happening. And she mentions that he is part of the cosmic force now. And she says that there are ways that those who have passed on can still guide or influence the living. And I don't know about you guys, but that sounds very Catholic to me.
Yes.
Like, the saints in heaven. That's exactly what happens, in our what we know to be true in our faith. The saints.
Yeah. And I would love to kind of take it a step further and someday speak with maybe a Native American or some other, like a Catholic who is part of a culture where animals are more, and creation in general is much more in touch with, their upbringing and their connection to God, than a lot of us in the, urban West sort of, are used to. So, yeah.
Right. I'd also like to, another perspective that I think would be really good here is the Japanese Catholic, like the person who has a culture that is so steeped in ancestry and the way that ancestry affects us now, and then learning about the communion of the saints and going, oh yeah, well, of course that makes perfect sense. That's exactly what, and I think for a lot of us in the West, it's harder to wrap our minds around the fact that people who are dead are still part of the plan, are still part of the economy of salvation and the moving forward of our faith, even personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's one of the great things about Star Wars is that it speaks to so many truths that we know in our faith, and this is just one example of it, that death is not the end, and in a kind of an atheist mindset, that there is nothing after death. If God doesn't exist, if all of that is just our way of sort of trying to gain meaning in the world, but it's not really true, then when we die, our bodies just decompose and that's it. But we know that that's not true. And the same thing plays out in the Star Wars universe. We have the Force ghosts, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and all the others, and Kanan kind of speaking through this wolf in order to guide and influence those who are still living. And yeah, I was making the parallel that, when we pray for the intercession of the saints, we're doing the same exact thing. We're asking for their help, their guidance in our life, and interceding for us to God. And there are many, 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 many examples of saints doing more than just kind of guiding. But, anytime that a saint is canonized, there always has to be miracles attributed to them, which are very direct, interventions in the world that do some healing. Often it's a medical thing. Someone was praying to a saint and they were healed miraculously, and the doctors don't know what happened, and the only explanation is the intercession of the saint that they were praying to. So just some really cool connections there to the communion of saints. At that point, after this discussion between Ahsoka and Ezra, Ezra immediately thinks that if Kanan sent him there through the wolf to help Ahsoka, then maybe that's exactly what he can do to save Kanan as well. And Ezra, being the headstrong, impulsive kid he is, immediately rushes off to see if he can find the portal that would show him Kanan's final moments. And of course, he does find that exact portal. And Ahsoka, is trying to urge him to be patient, and to not take Kanan out of that moment. And so we actually get to watch the final moments of Kanan again, which is a really sad scene, but it's super powerful. Kanan, of course, sacrificed his life in order to help the rest of the crew escape the Empire. And Ahsoka tells him that if Ezra were to reach in and take him out of that moment, then all of them would have died. Mm-hmm. And so Ezra is struggling with that grief that he wants to save Kanan, but also the knowledge that if he actually gives in to that and saves Kanan out of his desire to save him, then that action is actually going to cause them all to die. And Ahsoka says that she can relate because she can't save her master, who has become Darth Vader, and Ezra can't save his master from death.
And we got to see that moment too with her and Anakin facing off, and we got to see the struggle that she went through trying to draw him back,
mm-hmm.
and then realizing that he's just gone.
This struggle that Ezra goes through, and then finally his ability to let go is pretty significant because of not only what it says for the plot of Rebels going forward and that story, but you think about how Ezra is pretty young, and he like Anakin Skywalker lost his parents, and so Kanan was like another parent to him, and so he actually passes this test, whereas Anakin does not. Ezra is able to let go, whereas Anakin doesn't. And I think this episode, first of all, it's really cool to see how powerful in the Force Ezra is, and the fact that he could open this portal, and then the fact that he passes this test, and then just how Ahsoka helps Ezra, by saying, Ezra's like, well, you don't understand, and she's like, yes, I do. It really reminded me of what we can do for other people when we have suffered something. And I think a lot of us can relate to that at this point in time, that so many people are going through so much. And this just kind of, to me, was sort of a microcosm of what we can do for others. Like when we experience suffering and pain and difficult circumstances, and we can be there for somebody who's going through that and say, no, you can do this. I do understand what you're going through, and you can do this. So I thought that was neat. But also, if I can kind of get into like the reason why it's important for Ezra to pass this test, is because I think actually, like, since I went through and I wrote down every single like thing that all the Force voices say, it kind of tells a story, and sort of prepares the viewer, and really sort of more so, I think, is telling a story for Ezra, like to prepare him for this moment. Like one of the things I wrote down at the very beginning was Yoda was saying, train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose. And then later on, Yoda also says, rejoice for those around you who transform into the Force. And there's just so much of that. You know, again, Yoda says, let go of everything you fear to lose. So like the reason that it's so important that we've seen, and this goes back to the genius of George Lucas, is that when we are, you know, Ezra he didn't want to let go of Kanan and that pain, but it's important that we let people go and we let those moments of suffering go so that we're not tied to them. Because when we are sort of bound to them in like a spiritual, emotional sense, then we're not free to live our lives, right, without that pain, you know, without constantly referring back to that pain as like the source of our decision making and, you know, all of that, right, how we interact with other people, and so it is so pivotal to continue to bring up this theme, this struggle of letting go, is because it's a central part of like the spiritual life, you know, of any religion. And just, you know, even if you're not quote unquote religious, but I think people of any sort of life experience could relate to that and could affirm that.
I think that is a very profound insight into what's going on here. So thanks for sharing. I want to go deeper with that, because I think that there's some really good things that come from this. You know, Ezra is so focused on his own suffering and grief and loss, and he has to move forward. But in order to move forward, he has to let go. But how he moves forward, I think, is crucial, because in order to move forward, in order to let go, he has to understand Kanan's sacrifice.
Right.
And that's what Ahsoka does for him, is she's the one who explains to him that, you know, Kanan, he has to do this. He has to die, because he if he doesn't, then his sacrifice is meaningless, because you all die. And so Ezra has to understand his pain and his grief in order to move forward. And I couldn't help but find a parallel to today's gospel.
Yeah.
As we're recording it tonight, I was like, okay, this is totally providential, but because Ezra and Peter are very, very similar. For those of you who are listening to this later, the gospel is Matthew chapter 16, verses 21 to 27. It's when Jesus is telling his disciples that he has to go to Jerusalem to suffer and to die on the cross and be raised. And Peter takes Jesus aside and says, God forbid, Lord, no such thing shall ever happen to you. And Jesus turns to Peter and says, get behind me, Satan, you are an obstacle to me. You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do. And then Jesus goes on to explain the nature of discipleship is denying ourselves, taking up our cross and following him. And I found that there was a very profound similarity between Peter and Ezra, because in the same way, Peter doesn't want Jesus to suffer. And that's it's a human desire. It's a good desire. We don't want suffering. And yet he doesn't understand that the nature of Jesus' suffering is redemptive, and that Jesus has to go to the cross in order to effect redemption of the world. And so he has to explain that for Peter in order for him to understand it, and then be able to move on and ultimately, allow it to happen. And ultimately then Peter himself dies for his faith in Jesus. But there's just that I thought it was a very interesting parallel that Ezra too just doesn't understand Canaan's sacrifice. And he has to understand it before he can allow it to happen and then move forward. So I very much saw in Canaan a Christ figure. He gave himself entirely for the sake of his crew, that self-sacrificial love that he gave of himself entirely in order to save the lives of his family, and ultimately which for the rebellion too, because they would go on to do work for the rebellion and fight against the empire. So suffering, I guess, is the key here, that suffering is not meaningless when we have faith. And so the desire, the natural human desire is to prevent it, to escape it, to medicate ourselves so we don't feel it. But that's the wrong way to approach it, because suffering does indeed have meaning. For us as Catholics, it's because it's linked to Jesus's death, suffering on the cross, which is redemptive in nature. And when we suffer, we can unite ourselves to the cross of Christ. In the Star Wars universe, Canaan's death and the suffering that Ezra is going through is also not meaningless, because it's something that gives him purpose in order to move forward and continue to fight against the Empire.
Yeah, I was struck here, having watched this so close to that episode with Obi-Wan, with that same moment of Obi-Wan's sacrifice when fighting Darth Vader, and his quote, "If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine." And as we've built the character of Darth Vader over these, couple of decades of new media coming out about who Anakin was and how he became who he was, and how he developed into this warlord and this Sith master who was incredibly powerful. For Obi-Wan to say that to him, that I will become more powerful than you can possibly imagine, is intense. And then when you look at it in this vein, and that Obi-Wan knew that at that moment Luke was watching, and so instead of continuing the fight, he says that line, knowing that what he's doing is transferring that sense of purpose over to Luke, and it's going to change the galaxy. And that's, I was watching this and kind of putting all of those pieces together, and it really, such a finely crafted episode because of that kind of thing. But yeah, it gives you chills, when you think about what just the sacrifice as it stands on its own, but then in the world of Star Wars, and how that continuation of purpose, that continuation of will, of moving forward and improving ourselves and becoming better than we were. It's an understanding that every small act leads us on and makes us grow, or it makes us fail, it makes us fall, and it makes us become the thing that we hate and the thing that we despise.
So something that kind of ties in what both of you are saying is something that my pastor said in his homily today, which is that we don't sacrifice just for sacrifice's sake, but the purpose of the sacrifice is love. And Jesus, the purpose of his sacrifice is love. Canaan, you even go back to the daughter. Ultimately, the daughter sacrificed herself, first of all, for her brother, right? And then ultimately her life force was given to Ahsoka. And so, this whole concept of it's not just to sacrifice. I think a lot of times maybe in religion, we can kind of get caught up in making sacrifices, but that's not the point of it. Right, the point of it is to grow in love. And so just this idea that Ezra comes to understand that Canaan's sacrifice was for them. It was out of love for them. And Ezra even says, oh, I miss my parents. I wish life could be, like it used to be, like it was. And he's just so focused on the past, which again is a Star Wars theme, that he's unable to answer his purpose in the present moment. Mm-hmm. And he's unable to recognize his calling in the present moment to live with that sense of love for those that he fights with, those that he fights for, the people of Lothal. And so I think, he learns that lesson from Ahsoka and from Kanan's model. Mm-hmm. So yeah, absolutely. It all kind of ties in so beautifully. And I love that the Mortis arc sort of has more depth of meaning for us when we reflect on all of this.
I love the Mortis arc. Yeah, and Ezra's whole demeanor changes from this kind of point forward. He makes the comment that he learned the final lesson that Kanan wanted to teach him. And I tend to think he never spells it out what the lesson was, but I mean it's a combination of all of what we've been talking about. Remembering the past, but not being, just caught up in it, letting go, and living in the present. But also ultimately, I think even like our life has to be ordered towards love, and that very well could possibly mean that I will give my life for those whom I love. Whether or not he does this, we don't know, because he's still off in the unknown region somewhere. But he at least has that wisdom for when he goes off with. In a sense, we're gonna review the finale arc, and it's been a while since I've seen it. But I mean, in a sense, there too, if I remember right, he is sort of sacrificing himself by taking himself and Thrawn out into the unknown regions.
Right.
We just don't know what happens with that. So he is very clearly using the lessons that he's learned from Kanan in the next few episodes, which we'll get to.
He's very focused from this point forward. He almost like becomes a Jedi in a way, like he understands who he is, what his purpose is in the big scheme of things, and how he and the Force sort of have this new. He understands the relationship, I think, even better, of himself as a being in the Force and connected with everyone who's gone before him and who will come after him.
It's very much the hero's journey, Rebels, I think, for Ezra. And this is kind of the moment where he finally, becomes a man, becomes the hero.
Right.
Because even in one of the immediately preceding episodes, I mean, he is lamenting at how lost he is without Kanan. And it's, at this moment that he's finally not lost, and he's able to kind of pick up that torch of being a Jedi and march forward and not just run and hide in fear.
When we get to see both of them go through that change over the course of the series too, like you see Kanan starts off in that same high energy, wanting to move, constantly trying to do something, and then settles into that calmness, especially once he loses his sight, and he's that's he settles into being knowledgeable about the Force, knowing the Force is flowing through him. And you see that in Ezra now too. This is kind of his moment where he's lost a sense that he had and gained a much greater sense of himself and of the will of the Force.
Yeah, this is storytelling done right. And it's storytelling that, I mean, as you watch it, I mean, we can all relate to it because we've all been in Ezra's shoes, and so we identify with him. And even watching these episodes, we learn the lessons that Ezra is supposed to learn as well, which is a really cool thing that these episodes are able to do, especially for I mean, for all audiences, but for the young kids who are watching these shows as well. With that, Emperor Palpatine kind of breaks in and shakes things up a little bit.
Suddenly, there he is. What? Wait, what?
And it's Ian McDiarmid.
Yeah. Which I didn't realize it was him, because I know that is it Sam Witwer who also does the voice for Palpatine at some points. There's another voice actor who often does him, but yeah, this was Ian McDiarmid himself, which adds so much. So apparently he could sort of reach through one of the portals because Ezra had opened another portal. That wasn't entirely clear, but this is also a very mystical place. But either way, the temple is open because Ezra opened a portal, and Palpatine appears in one of them, and of course is trying to capture Ezra and Ahsoka. But before we get to that confrontation, Hera and Zeb finish preparing for their disruption to save Sabine, and Sabine is helping Hayden interpret the art. And so this is where they finally kind of get to the core of what that particular art piece is showing. And they determine that the father is showing the way to the portal. The wolves are the portal guardians. The owl is either a servant of the daughter or possibly the daughter herself when acting as a spirit guide. So the owl, Morai, is very much connected to the daughter and, of course, Ahsoka. And they conclude that since the daughter opened the gateway, they think that the son will close it. And at that moment, Zeb informs Sabine through Morse code on the wall that of the impending chaos that is about to happen. And one of the command centers attempts to kind of take off the ground and causes all sorts of chaos to allow Sabine to escape. Meanwhile, back in the world between worlds, the Emperor's throwing crazy blue fire at Ahsoka and Ezra. Almost, is it Hades?
From Disney, the Disney version of Hades that does that. Yeah, well, I was wondering, like, if it's that because of where they are, like he's doing force lightning, but because of where they are, it's like catching the whole, like everything's force, so it's just kind of becoming this weird thing. So watching it again this time, I was really like trying to process like what exactly is going on here. But then, I think that's one of the beautiful things about the Sith stuff is that where the Jedi stuff is all very monk meditative, kind of more Tai Chi than anything. The Sith stuff is just sorcery, just straight up. Yep. Like, that's what they call it. They call it sorcery. They call it by all the mystic arts. And so it's very dark and, so it would make sense that this time it just happens to be force flames instead of force lightning.
The Sith very much tend to be more showy. Unless you're Anakin, and then you just show off in general. But and this blue fire has rope qualities to it because it catches Ezra's leg and starts to pull him back. But Ahsoka is able to slice through it with her lightsaber. And
that was all just okay. I accept it.
Yep. Yeah. Well, they're meant to escape. It's the will of the Force. And
there you go.
They both run back to their individual portals. Ahsoka at one point makes the comment that she can't go with Ezra, but she has to go back to her portal. And so she is able to get to her portal and lands back on Malachor in an empty Sith temple with Morai. And that's kind of the end that we ever see of Ahsoka. So we know that she wasn't killed by Vader, but then we don't really know what happens to her after that. So that could be something that they're going to explore in The Mandalorian. We'll see. But it also begs the question, though, where was she during episodes 4, 5, and 6?
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps we'll get some answers because she wasn't explicit in the movies, of course. Ezra, meanwhile, is able to get through his portal and land back on Lothal. And amidst all the chaos that Hera and Zeb have launched in the excavation camp, and Ezra directs everyone that they need to seal the portal into the temple. And Chopper has his moment to shine, which was really kind of funny. He's driving a mechanical digging machine, and he uses that to just take out the troopers and block them from getting to the rest of the crew, which is
Chopper's great, man.
So Chopper. Yeah.
Chopper's, yeah.
Oh.
And he's like mouthing off to them like while he's doing it too.
Yep. That sarcastic droid is awesome. So meanwhile, Ezra and the rest of the crew is heading over to the painting, and Sabine tells Ezra to activate the sun, whom they've deduced will close the temple. And Ezra manages to use the Force and activate the sun, and the portal does indeed close. And the crew, meanwhile, jumps on board this digging machine led by Chopper and hightail it out of the camp, the excavation site. And meanwhile, the temple is kind of collapsing in on itself and closing. And there was a moment there as they're leaving that I thought was really beautiful, that we hear Kanan's voice saying, "The Force will be with you always." And then Ezra passes out in the machine.
And I think some of us were sort of wondering when we saw that, like, is Ezra dying? Like, because he passes out when he activates the sun and in the painting, and then then we see like this white blinding light and like the Force will be with you. And it's like, oh my gosh, what's happening? But he didn't die.
Thankfully. Yeah. That would be a little too intense maybe for one season of Kanan and Ezra both.
Gosh.
No,
I'm just getting rid of all of the Jedi. No more of this Jedi stuff.
Well,
Done.
but it's also interesting too, because I mean, as anybody's watching this, we know that Ezra also doesn't show up in episodes 4, 5, and 6. So I remember watching these episodes when they first aired, wondering, is Ezra going to die at the end of the show? Because where is he in episodes 4, 5, and 6? So, so that question definitely is not just out of the blue. But thankfully, no, he's not dead. Or at least we don't know that yet. But he doesn't die here, for sure. He wakes up, and it had to have been just kind of moments that have passed. But he wakes up, and Zeb makes some snide comment about not liking going on Jedi missions, and they can just keep them. And Ezra heads outside to find Hera, and absolutely nothing else is out there. The temple, the pit, it's all gone. There's just a symbol on the ground, and that's all that's left of the temple. And the episode concludes with, again, kind of focusing back on Kanan, and we get Hera asking if Kanan's really gone, and which was, Hera's so distraught with the loss of Kanan, and Ezra tells her that yes, he is really gone. But then Ezra says that he knows what to do now, and he says Kanan showed him. And in a way, it was one last lesson. And that's goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that the lesson to let go, the lesson to, how to live now in the present moment with the loss of someone like Kanan or a father, but also to live with that self-sacrificial love, I think is also very much tied into all of this. And Ezra gets one last chance to say goodbye to Kanan, because Doom, the wolf, appears kind of out in the mist and the fog, and he turns away, and the episode ends then with Ezra saying goodbye, Kanan.
Yeah, so when I first watched this season and I saw Kanan die, I cried a lot. I really, it really hit me. And I felt like these last episodes of Rebels were almost like a help for the audience to sort of grieve Kanan, and to see the characters going through that and sort of, finally see the doom like on the horizon. And it was very much a process.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that just like as a fan. But yeah, I think it was like a grieving process for a lot of fans that were watching too.
But I also appreciated how they showed, especially Hera, as she grieved, that wasn't something that was just like brushed over, but it took a number of episodes, and grief is a very real thing. And so to really grapple with it, I think was important for them to show and for the audience to see and share in. I remember watching this season for the first time, and I think I still had I'm glad that they didn't save Kanan, that his sacrifice happened and he wasn't saved. But I remember watching it initially when it first came out, thinking, oh, this is Star Wars. They're not going to. There's going to be a loophole. There's going to be a way to bring him back. Like it's it's Star Wars. Everybody lives, but that's not what happened. And I really appreciated that because it really brings home the reality of the sacrifice. And it's not, if you were to undo it, then it's meaninless again, but rather saving it. And Ezra recognizing that preserves the deep meaning that was behind that act.
Well, and we see so often in Star Wars, we see the reaction to loss like this drives major galactic events, right? And we've seen even in Rebels, we've seen other characters who've had a very poor reaction to the loss of someone. Like Saw Gerrera makes an appearance, and it's the loss of his sister that kind of drives him to be this loose cannon that everybody works with because he's effective, but doesn't really like working with because they question his motive or his methods. Yep. So, you get, and I mean, Anakin is like the prime example, right? Of loss, of loss driving someone to be who they are not. And then in his, it's even that just the fear of that loss drove him to that.
Profound truths told through Star Wars. I mean,
there you go.
Yeah, I mean, this is why we love stories. I mean, both are the real story, the Bible and our own personal, histories and everything. But also that's why we love fantasy, fairy tales, science fiction. All of it is a way to grapple with the reality that we experience as humans, and then we get to put characters in positions of grappling with the same things that we are, and learning how to live and how to love. Yeah, Star Wars is doing a fantastic job at that. Any other final comments on this episode before we wrap things up?
No, just I guess just to encourage people. It's really neat to go back, and if you can, there's like YouTube videos out there that break down some of the voices that Ezra hears, but then just putting on the captions on this episode, and just kind of seeing how, I mean, I could just imagine Dave Filoni like trying to pick out exactly the right quotes to sort of lay out this story. To me, it's really cool that the chunk when Ezra begins running towards the Kanan portal, and then you hear Kanan say like, "Want to ride?" It's like it's almost like, so you want to ride there, and then you can learn what it truly means to be a Jedi. He says that, and then he says, "Kid, I'm about to let everyone in on the secret." And then he says, "I survived one war. I'm not ready for another one." It's almost like saying, "Don't pull me out of this portal. I don't want to go through the battle with all type of thing." So if you just like go through the whole, all the different quotes and sort of try to see what the story was that they were trying to tell, it's really neat. So definitely, if you have time, check that out.
Yeah. And I wanted to cycle back to the 2D animation thing.
Oh,
I love that we're seeing the really cool thing about the expanding universe is that we're seeing characters in different art styles. And so, you get a feel of it there. But I thought it was really interesting because Hera makes an appearance in Squadrons, the new Star Wars game.
Yep.
And looks very different, looks completely different. And she's already been in a live action. She was in the Return of the Jedi. There is an actual Twi'lek, green colored Twi'lek character already there, just kind of off to the side. Rex is there as well. If you look hard enough for him, you'll see him. And so seeing these characters come to life in all of these different media is so neat, because you get this. It's really cool to watch what an artist chooses to highlight about a particular character when they draw them. And so, seeing that 2D animation version of things that are going on here and getting a different view of the vision for Rebels was really cool. And it bothered me immensely when I first started watching this series. The lightsabers just bothered me so much. But they grew on me as the series went on. I got more and more involved with them, and I liked them. And so then seeing a different perspective of that, again, it's really, I love that it's such an expanding universe, and that we're seeing so many different sides of all of these characters that we really love.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add. So I think that's it from us then. So listeners, of course, we want to hear what you guys thought of this episode of Star Wars Rebels. And so definitely be sure to email us or comment on our Facebook or Twitter page to let us know what you thought. And you can email us any feedback at starwars@sqpn.com. And you can find StarQuest on Facebook at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia and on Twitter at SQPN. And now we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create The Secrets of Star Wars, including this week, Fred T., Carolyn M., Stephen B., and Samuel G. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Star Wars and all the shows that we make here at StarQuest. And if you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. Also, be sure to subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts now, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or on the SQPN YouTube channel. Just be sure to click the bell to receive notifications for new episodes, and definitely be sure to leave us a review on the Apple Podcasts or where you listen to our podcast, because that helps spread the word of the show and helps more people find us. And you can find any and all previous episodes of The Secrets of Star Wars by going to sqpn.com/Star Wars. And we will be back in 2 weeks where we will begin to review the show finale of Rebels by reviewing the next episode in this season 4, episode 14, A Fool's Hope. And so until then, Angela Cialana, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Wars.
It was a pleasure. Hope everyone else out there listening stays well and live your calling in the present moment.
Absolutely. And Thomas Sanjuro, thanks for joining us tonight as well.
It was nice to be here.
And once again, I'm Father Andrew Kinstetter. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Star Wars on StarQuest.